Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am head of the Office of Institutional Innovation Research at Stepi, Lee Myung-hwa. Today, I would like to present to you on how South Korea is responding to COVID-19 through policies. These are the topics I'll cover today. There are four main topics. Number one, I will give you a background on the situation of COVID-19 in Korea and outside of Korea, and also our immediate responses to COVID-19. Then I will share with you our recovery plan for the post-COVID-19 era. And last but not least, I will talk about the lessons from COVID-19 as well as policy implications. As you know well, at the global level, this is what COVID-19 looks like. As you can see, we continue to see new infections. As you can see in the graph, in North America and in Europe, we continue to see an increase in confirmed cases. And we thought that Korea flattened the curve, but yesterday we had 500 confirmed cases, and today there was a news report that we've had more than 600 daily confirmed cases. So many people worry about the third wave of the pandemic in Korea. Because of COVID-19, we have had a lot of adjustments in our economic outlook as well. At the end of last year, OECD gave this projection for the economic growth. You can see pathway A here. Due to COVID-19, the outlook for economic growth has not been met. And pathway B or C is what we are seeing at the moment. We have had a lot of losses in terms of the economy, and we still see a lot of difficulties in the future outlook for economic recovery. In terms of the Korean economic outlook, which was announced in August, when there is a single shock and when there are two shocks, GDP could take different paths. And you can see that in both scenarios, we can expect a minus growth. A few days ago, OECD announced the outlook for the economic growth, and Korea was projected to record minus 1.2% growth. And now I would like to talk about the government response to COVID-19. And this is a slide that I can introduce to you with a sense of pride. So this is basically Korea's crisis response system. We went through SARS and also MERS situations. So we already were equipped with a crisis response system in the face of COVID-19. We have the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters, which is headed by the Prime Minister. And then we also have the Central Disaster Management Headquarters headed by the Ministry of Health and Welfare, and Central Disease Control Headquarters headed by the Director of KCDC. So we already had this crisis response system in place, which allowed us to respond better to COVID-19. Furthermore, we have had fast-track amendments of several laws. Number one, we had the amendment in the Infectious Disease Control and Prevention Act. This act was amended very swiftly in order to allow swift hospitalization, diagnosis, and treatment. Those who reject hospitalization and treatment can be punished under the amended law. Also, the Quarantine Act was amended so that we were able to ban the entry of foreign nationals arriving from at-risk countries or regions. Also, the Medical Service Act was amended, and this laid the legal ground for monitoring of infectious diseases. This was our swift response after COVID-19 broke out. And also, in terms of contact tracing, personal information like the gender, name, location, etc. are no longer disclosed because there was some controversy regarding the privacy of contact tracing. So that was another amendment to the law that we made. And these are some of the key R&D activities in Korea in relation to COVID-19. As you can see, we have KNIH under KCDC, and we have Korea Health Industry Development Institute, Institute Pasteur Korea, Korea Institute of Chemical Technology, and KRIBB. These are the public institutions that are doing research and development to develop test kits, treatments, vaccines, and also they are working to secure the right infrastructure. Also, there are private companies engaged in R&D activities, and you can see the details in this table. We've had a big growth of the diagnostics companies, and that is why we were able to secure the diagnostics kits very quickly. And this is all thanks to these companies that worked hard. And next, as you know, there's the word K-quarantine, which demonstrates the excellent infection prevention measures of Korea. And this has drawn attention from across the world. And one of them was our Epidemiological Investigation Support System, or EISS. We can very swiftly trace the movements of the infected people. And this is based on our smart city technology. We can track people using credit card information or GPS. All of this information is integrated in order to quickly carry out epidemiological investigation. And also, we can actually distinguish the close contacts so that we can trace their movements. Also, we have an application to trace the movements of confirmed cases so that we can ensure that they isolate themselves. We have an application for self-isolation as well to make sure that they stay at home. And now I would like to introduce to you about how we hope to recover from COVID-19, how we are preparing for the days beyond the pandemic. One core initiative of the Korean government is the so-called Korean New Deal, which was announced in July by the president himself. This is about turning COVID-19 into an opportunity, turning the crisis into an opportunity so that we can completely transform the social system. The basic pillar is the Digital New Deal and the Green New Deal. And also you have another pillar characterized by strengthening of the safety net. If you look at the Digital New Deal, it involves stronger integration of DNA throughout the economy so that we can actually build a digital ecosystem throughout our society and ecosystem. And also the Digital New Deal involves digitizing educational infrastructure, fostering the contactless industry, and digitization of social overhead capital. Another important pillar of the Korean New Deal is Green New Deal. This is about turning the overall urban infrastructure green and also achieving low carbon as well as decentralized energy policy. Also, it includes the green industry and innovation in the green industry. Below that, you see stronger safety net. One of them could be resolving the unemployment issues. Korean New Deal is really a broad policy that requires a lot of budget. So the budget is about 16 billion won. And 160 trillion won is the budget dedicated to the Korean New Deal. So it really involves a lot of investments in order to carry out Green Deal, Digital New Deal, and reinforce the safety net to create more jobs as well. One of the most impressive points of the Korean New Deal is the organizational structure. Until now, the initiatives led by the governments were either led by an individual government agency or it was led at a pan-governmental level. In the case of Korean New Deal, since it involves such a grand vision and broad vision, it involves not just the government agencies, but also the National Assembly and the legislation. As you can see, there is a strategy meeting on the Korean New Deal, which is at the very top. This is chaired by the president. And then you have the joint committee between the government and the Democratic Party. And the co-chairs are Deputy Prime Minister of Economy and the Chief of the Korea New Deal Committee. From the government side, the Ministry of Economy is involved in order to identify and define the roles of all the other government agencies. Also, the Ministry of Economy is in charge of monitoring and coordinating the different government agencies. And from the party side, you have the chief of the Korean New Deal Committee heading this joint committee. So this is the governance for the Korean New Deal, and this is necessary because the Korean New Deal is not just one of the many initiatives, but the New Deal is really a grand vision that will create and shape the future of Korea, and that is why the government, as well as the National Assembly, which is the legislative body, have to be involved. Next, I would like to talk about what kind of science and technology policies we have in Korea. Last August, during the ministerial meeting, post-corona science and technology policy direction was announced. There are 5 main policy plans. Number 1 is to have private sector-driven R&D model, and number 2 is to foster digital transformation. Number 3 is to foster human resources, and number 4 is to have a science and technology-based crisis response system, and number 5 is about science and technology diplomacy. These are some of the promising technologies identified by Korea. There are mainly 8 areas ranging from healthcare, manufacturing, education, data protection, and so forth. There are about 30 different promising technologies under these 8 domains, and these promising technologies will be the focus of government support in the future. Next. After COVID-19, we have been reminded of the importance of international cooperation. And I always stress the importance of international cooperation. Today at this symposium, I would like to share with you how we are cooperating internationally with the less developed countries and the developing countries. This is related to ICT cooperation. In 48 countries, we have these projects to overcome digital disparity or digital gap. We have ISE or Information Access Center project. There are IACs established in developing countries in order to aid digitization in these countries, as well as to foster human resources in ICT. This is the cooperation between Korea and Paraguay. This is an ICT project between the 2 countries. Here you see how 3D printers are used to produce facial masks. Paraguayan University and Korea are working together. They worked together to accomplish this together. So we can respond to the crisis using ICT, and also we have a recovery plan so that we can survive in the post-COVID era. Now let me tell you some of our implications and lessons from COVID-19. What we learned, first of all, is the important role of science and technology. When I do research on policies related to COVID-19, one of the questions that get asked the most often is, what role did science and technology play? In response to COVID-19, of course, healthcare professionals worked very hard. And at the same time, what contribution did science and technology make? That's a question that I get often, and I often answer like this. One of the key characteristics of COVID-19 is that it's uncertain. There are so many things we don't know about the virus, which means it's very difficult to define which direction we should move in responding to COVID-19. And that was really the core characteristic of COVID-19 pandemic. Science and technology allows us to understand the virus better, and I think that was the major contribution of science and technology. When we first started having confirmed cases, we were able to have the genetic information of the virus, and there are so many different subclasses of the coronavirus, and these different classes have different characteristics in terms of the contagion. And therefore, securing scientific evidence for these different classes of virus was very important. Also, in contact tracing, ICT played a very important role because we had ICT-based contact tracing, which was very swift, and that helped us to address the pandemic. And also diagnostics kits, of course, were very important. The government continued to invest in the development of diagnostics kit, and private companies used AI to produce these kits very quickly, and that is why Korea was able to diagnose big numbers of people and test big numbers of people. Also, in terms of vaccines or therapy development, we may be a little behind other countries at the moment. However, science and technology did play an important role there. And that is why investment in R&D is very important. If you look at the US or other developed countries, Korea is still not investing as much in R&D of infectious diseases. Therefore, our lesson from COVID-19 is that we should step up the investment in this field. Next, we learned a lot about resilience. This was a completely unexpected crisis. How can we effectively and quickly respond to such a crisis? This is all up to the resilience of the systems in place. We came out of SARS and MERS, and so we know how important diagnostics kits were. That was the lesson we learned during the two earlier pandemics, and that is why the government was able to respond very quickly during COVID-19. And so I would like to stress resilience, and especially emergency approval scheme was very useful and effective during the COVID-19 pandemic. This involves the government granting quick approval for the diagnostics development companies. And the government promised that any company that developed good diagnostics kits would be approved on a fast-track scheme. And that was one of the reasons why we were able to respond so quickly to COVID-19. Also, we've had the drive-through test centers, which is something that nobody has thought of before. These were the things that were quickly approved and applied on the field. And this was what contributed to the high resilience of Korea to COVID-19. This is my last slide. In the international community, one of the most debated topics is transformation. Through COVID-19, we learned that we're at a turning point. We lived in the pre-COVID era. Now we have to live in the post-COVID era. So how can we actually make our life more sustainable, more inclusive, more resilient? We have to answer that question. And we have to really take a transformative approach to our policies as well at this turning point. The theme of today's symposium is also innovating STI policy, which means that we have to move away from the conventional ways. We have to move toward new ways. To do that, we have to have cross-sectoral and cross-agency and cross-domain cooperation. So people talk about the whole of government. You need to create collaboration systems across different stakeholders. Also, we have to define our direction for the policy, which is indicated in the Korean New Deal. Now we have to focus more on resolving social issues. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.